That's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody. You can hear that, it's my heater. It's hot. Or it's cold. So I have for you the final novel in the original Dune series by Frank Hebert. This is a milestone for me. I still have more to read after this, but in terms of what I'd say, because they're just loud, they're not the majority, otherwise the books wouldn't sell so well, but 50% of the Dune fan base firmly believes that these 6 books are the only books worth reading or touching. So in that sense, I have read what half of the fan base determines is worthy of reading. So I have done it. I have read every Dune book. I would say it was hard, but after reading Malazan Book of the Fallen, this is child's play. But I'm here today to discuss the final book by Frank Hebert, Chapterhouse, Dune. It was not meant to be the final book. We were supposed to get one more to complete a trilogy, with kind of God Emperor being a bridge between the 2 trilogies. Unfortunately, Frank Hebert died, so we did not get a conclusion. You're going to get a lot of fans are going to say, and that is where it ended. But you also get half of the fan base saying, no, well, we do have Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert, the son of Frank Herbert's duology that takes place after this, which we will discuss eventually. As to that, I will say, my channel has been predicated for years on the Star Wars Expanded Universe, which is a collection of books, comics, novels, short stories, video games from 1977 to 2014. It was a huge, different authors, different visions, all come together to play in the same sandbox of Star Wars, and it was meant to be canon as well. All that to say, Disney bought the rights. They now own Star Wars. All those stories that I loved don't count anymore. They are non-canon. However, I still prefer them, so I'm going to read them, regardless of its canonicity. But Disney owned the rights, so they rightfully, as the owners of said property, have the right to say what is and isn't canon, even if I think their canon stuff isn't great. So I'll say in the same sense to that, you can call it fan fiction. You can say that everything that Brian Herbert writes is wrong. But factually speaking, he has more of authority to say what is canon than you do, because he's actually blood related to Frank Herbert, not you. The debate can be had as to whether or not the stories we'll read past this are meant to be what it was meant to be. But at the end of the day, still, if he says it's canon, it holds more weight than some random screaming person online. So there is that. But anyway, on to the point of the actual discussion about the book. I had notes, or I started to write notes, but I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be held under a lot of fire for this. I just got bored and stopped taking notes because I just didn't care. If I had to sum this book up, it is like God Emperor, where it wants to shove to you a bunch of ideas. I, personally, you are free to disagree, don't feel that any of the ideas presented in this book are nearly as intriguing or interesting as in God Emperor. But in God Emperor, if you pay attention, about 20% of the book is like actual plot, as opposed to 80%, which is just philosophical meanderings. But if you were to do like a 2-hour film on God Emperor, you could probably do that pretty easily in terms of what the plot is. However, would that capture the reason so many people like God Emperor? I don't think it would, because part of what makes God Emperor work is those philosophical meanderings. It's that intrigue about this worm man, about these higher concepts, these higher questions about the nature of reality. But people glaze this man, Frank Herbert, like he is Christ himself, which is funny because the entire point of the series, supposedly, is about not following leaders, but then praise him so hard, as if the next book in this trilogy would have just been eye-opening to the cosmos and the mind and this and that, as if he wasn't just a normal man like the rest of us. It's just kind of crazy how much glazing there is for this man. Sorry. I felt like I wasted my time with this. And when I feel like I have to work, when I'm not working, it pisses me off. But on to the point of God Emperor, the beauty of it requires that length. You could do a film in 2 hours pretty easily with the actual plotting of it. Because only 20% of that book is like actual plot, where it progresses forward. You could do that in 2 hours, but I don't think it would capture the magic. Heretics, I'm not exactly sure you would do that. Probably could be a mini-series. But the point is that Chapterhouse would actually benefit from only being 2 hours in terms of enjoyment for me personally. Because here's the thing, there's 500 pages of nothing. There are interesting philosophical quandaries. Can't speak. It's 5 a.m. in the morning. Quandaries. There are discussions about politics and the nature of things. All that's fascinating, and there's little subtle dropping things of world building and or plot threads that could become important later, but aren't in this story. From introductions to big things that could be big game changers for future stories, which don't really matter here, which stuff like cyborgs now exist. They didn't exist in the last book, as far as I was aware, but now cyborgs exists. So that's a merger of humanity and technology, which maybe there was that in the past, but now we have it again. What else do we have? We have futars, which are a mixture of a cat and a person. So, like Skyrim, or Oblivion, or Morrowind of the Bethesda Elder Scrolls titles with the cat people. We have cat people now. Why? We just do. No, there's an actual answer has to do with the Tylaxus. Regardless, we get things like that sprinkled throughout these 500 pages, right? Things of intrigue, things of interest, or people chairs. We got people chairs? I don't even want to dive into that. That's terrifying. People chairs? Okay, we're moving on from that. Scary, but a lot of interesting things like that sprinkled throughout. Another problem that I have personally is the characters, because I really had no idea what to expect getting into Heretics, and I was so surprised. I came in with like no expectations. I came out really, really enjoying Heretics, really liking Sienna, really liking Duncan Idaho, really liking Miles Tagg, and then they killed him off. And then you start this book, and we got another Gola of Miles Tagg, just so he could become the same character. Now, I know that's the point of the Gulas, basically, but here's the thing. At least in Dune Messiah, in Chapterhouse Dune, we followed the same Duncan, right? And then, of course, the next book took place like 3,000 years later, so of course it couldn't be the same one. It made sense. Heretics, Chapterhouse, we have the same Duncan. We're following the same Duncan. Alright? But Miles Tagg, from one book to the next, he's killed off only to be brought back. Then why even kill him off? If he's just going to be... Is it just so he's younger and more spry? Is that the reasoning? Just so you have a younger version of that same character? I don't know. Sienna is not the same character anymore, because we've jumped quite a few years. She's like a straight-on adult now, and she just doesn't have the same personality. She's not the same. Marbella is kind of interesting. Frank Herbert fails in all accounts in almost every aspect when it comes to romance. I never feel it. Any of these stories. The only time I felt it was with Paul and Chani, but outside of that, the romance fails every time. Every time. And I guess Leto and his love, that was kind of weird, but that one kind of worked. But most of the time he fails at romance. He just fails at it, which is shocking, because his entire book, is kind of like a dedication to his wife. but he just can't write it. He just can't. He can't. I'm sorry. Unless I'm just not meant to feel something emotional toward it, then sure. If I'm just meant to be like, intellectual about it, I'm like, oh yeah, they're in a relationship. But oh yeah, they're in a relationship, and oh, they're in a relationship are two completely different things. So I just didn't feel that. I hate Odrade. I don't find her interesting. I find her boring. The Honor Matre are this weird sexual thing, and in Heretics they were interesting because the intrigue behind them. Are they? Um, what are they? Are they, a offshoot of the Bene Gesserit? Like, they didn't know, and they seem to be this new big threat. In this book, we learn that they are not really a big threat, that they're hiding and running from another big threat, which does cause intrigue. What is that? Not that you're going to find out, because this book ends without giving an explanation. The next book, of course, would have, but then he died. Um, but then pretty much everything that, there's enough in Heretics to kind of just determine, oh yeah, for sure, the Honor Matre are copies. They're not copies. They are an offshoot of the Bene Gesserit, from the Scattering. It's pretty much like, that's kind of like, you get it by like the end. Like, that's totally what's going on. All that Chapterhouse does is reiterate and like pretty much stamp down and absolutely prove for certain that that's the case. You get a little bit more sprinkles of information. During the Scattering, with the Bene Gesserit and the fish speakers of Leto's, acclaim, that they banded together, and this offshoot created the Honor Matre. That's basically all you have to know, or the additional information you get here, which is just confirmation, really. And like I said, and there's a bunch of philosophical stuff going on in between these chapters. People are having conversations, philosophy, all this stuff going back and forth. It's stuff, every Dune book does it, but that doesn't mean it's entertaining or interesting. Because, and again, nothing here is really said that hasn't been said before. Like, not really. So it just feels redundant. And, then we get past page 500 and stuff starts picking up. Like, before, it's like people are kind of just standing around talking, not really doing much. But here, finally, we actually have progression. Stuff's happening. With the, was it Odrade? We have the Bene Gesserit meeting up with this Spider Queen of the Honor Matre, and things start really picking up. Things start getting really engaging, and then, by the end of it, Shiana and Duncan, they barely make it out, only to cut to something completely separate. And it's also probably the best written part of the entire book, with these two characters, Marty and Daniel. Who are they? We don't know. The implication heavily seems to be that they are Talaxu face dancers that have separated and gone and do their own thing, but also seem to be extremely advanced technology, because they seem to be nowhere near Duncan and Shiana, but are able to see them and see exactly where they're going from a distance that is seemingly far away. That's the most interesting aspect, but then the story ends. Oh, I should also forget to mention something mightily important, I guess. There's nothing wrong with this, mind you. Jews are very important in this plot. Now, there's nothing wrong with Jews. So I emphasize Jews in terms of they have never, as far as I understood it, in the first 5 books, the Orange Catholic Bible is meant to be a religion that is a mix of Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, if you want to make that separate, even though it's just another branch of Christianity, and, like Islam, all the religions trumped into one. But apparently, that's not the case, because we also got people who are just Jews, and all of a sudden, they're important to the plot. Okay, I guess. Okay. I got nothing to add there. I mean, cool. But why now? Is it like enough time has passed and now the 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 homogeny religion is now being splintered again to be separate? I don't know. I don't really get it. I probably missed something, I'm sure. I miss so many things in every read through of everything I ever read, because I'm just a simple man. I'm not smart, and I'm not claiming to be smart. Sure, people will be like, well, you just understand it because you're dumb, and you're probably right, but it was something that happened. Um, I really enjoyed the book 500 pages onward. 500 to the end, when it really started picking up. The first 500 was a struggle. Not because it was hard to read, not because it was long, because this is, again, a layup. I've read the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, a fantasy series, which 6 or 5 out of the 10-book series are over 1,000 pages long. This is nothing by comparison. But they had more page time and those stories, and yet kept me more intrigued and interested throughout than this story did in 600. So I do see that as a problem. Now I understand also during this time, historically, his wife had passed away or was dying, and that must have affected him. And that's another thing, if you notice too, that with Heretics and Chapterhouse was this kind of shift of priority and direction. Because the Bene Gesserit were maybe never villains, but they were certainly meant to be antagonistic, and certainly not heroic. It is only with Heretics and Chapterhouse as there's this transition to making them the heroes and the primary characters of this plot. Which is weird, because it definitely wasn't the direction of the first 4 books, but now that seems to be the case. Which is definitely a direction that was inspired because of his wife. I think that's clear as day. That being said, I don't have too many characters to care about. I like Miles Tagg, I like Duncan, but there's just not enough of them, and there's too much of this in between. And I try, like I want to love it, but this effectively has killed my interest in the series. I almost don't want to read Brian and Kevin's works, not because I think they're gonna suck, but because this made me lose all interest. Why would I want to read a conclusion at all? Whether by Frank or by his son, why would I want to? Frank ruined it himself with this one. And I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but just because I was enjoying the last 100 pages doesn't mean I would want to suffer through it again. In fact, I'll leave a link in the description to Quinn's Ideas video. Because Quinn's Ideas video is only 1 hour and 27 minutes long, and it gives me the same exact information after I'd read this, more succinctly, more interesting, and shorter, without having to suffering through the entire thing, and that first, hour of his video, or first, 40 minutes, was all just little tidbits sprinkled throughout the 500 pages. Because nothing really happens in those first, 500 pages. Besides the little philosophical meanderings that Quinn made sure to mention. Because he glazes those books so hard as well. It's his favorite thing ever. Which, all the power to him. He's got more subscribers than me than what I know. But, I'm not gonna change my opinion for the masses just so I can be liked on the internet. The whole point of uploading YouTube videos is to broadcast myself. To share my actual thoughts. And I'm not trying to tell you that you're stupid if you enjoy this. I mean, if you like Dune at all, you're probably a bit smarter than the average, right? Like, my mom don't like to read that much. She wouldn't pick this series up. Never. She'd never try to go and read it. She'd be too bored, even by the first book, which is not boring. And like I said, if anybody's still sticking around, if they're not super mad at me, this is still written super well. I mean, the prose are kind of basic, but that's to be expected with most things. But it's still written well by him. It still has that Frank flair. It still has these interesting philosophical conversations. I just don't feel like any of it compares to previous conversations we've had in previous books. It just doesn't feel like that. And so it's and a lot of it just kind of feels redundant, just said differently. So it just gets frustrating. But it's still written well. It's still Frank Hebert. If you've read the first 5, you gotta conclude with this. I just wish it was a better time overall for me, personally. And I understand a lot of people love this book, and all the power to them. I'm sincerely glad you enjoy it. And despite how negative I might seem, I don't hate the book. I've read way worse books than this. This is not even a bad book. It's just a lackluster book, in my opinion. And certainly, if this is meant to be the middle book in a conclusion to a trilogy, it does not get me that hyped for finale. I mean, it certainly picked up steam in that last 100 pages, but still, it's not enough to make me go, oh god, I need a finale. Because it just wasn't like that. That being said, I will suffer through the next two books because I want a conclusion, because I've come this far. But, if it could just keep me entertained, then I might personally think it's better than this book, which I know is going to piss off half of the fan base. But it is what it is. I guess we'll see, though. There are some things that making me cautiously already upset about it. Dealing with Daniel and Marty, but not for the reasons you think. I mean, yes, the stuff that we'll hear about in the next book, I don't think is what Frank intended. I think the ending makes that very clear that's not the case. But also, I am a big fan of Schools of Dune, where they give certain robotic characters a very succinct ending and emotional catharsis. And so to go back on that, I mean, I guess that would have been written after this sequel duology, but it was such a satisfactory ending that I'd be really pissed off that they just kind of piss on that and bring the character back regardless. But that's a story for another time. So I have now read every single prequel story by Kevin Janderson and Brian Herbert, and I've now read the original core 6 books of the Dune franchise. Quite proud of myself, you know. I'm really happy I started this series, and if you're still here, again, I know I kind of dogged on it, and I apologize for that. I'm still glad I own this. I still love the Dune universe. I love all the things that it can make me think about. I loved the characters. Again, part of the issue is I don't have that investment in a lot of these characters now. I tried. I really did. But another thing with Frank is he's not, his writing isn't very personal or very emotional. It's very dry, it's very, I want you to think. It doesn't really want you to feel. If that makes sense. Maybe that's why I like Dune Messiah so much. Because I felt such pathos. Pathos? Reading that one. I actually like Dune Messiah more than Dune 1. I know that's crazy. I got the worst takes ever as a Dune fan. But I guess to end it positively, I just want to say I'm glad I read these 6 books. These do have some phenomenal ideas and interesting things to discuss with people. But the moment-to-moment reading just isn't fantastic for me personally. But if you feel differently, which I'm sure a lot of you do, please let me know in the comment section below. Maybe I can come around and appreciate it more, But if you stuck around this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you're willing, I'll see you when we discuss the next 2 books by his son. And I don't mean to speak ill of the dead. I think Frank Hebert was absolutely a treasure in the science fiction community. I'm glad he wrote these books. I'm glad that I live in a time where I can read this. If I was written before the 1960s, I may not have gotten to read this. If I'd been born 100 years later, I guess I could still read this, but I don't know. So many people have stopped reading at this point. But, I don't know. I think I exist in a nice time frame to be reading these stories, especially with the acclaim of Denis Villeneuve, with his film. So there's this renewed interest in the franchise. But, it's really easy to try to recommend to people the first 4 books or the first 3 books. It's after that where things get a little bit more, do I actually ask my friends to read this stuff, You really got to be like a diehard fan to read these last 3. But everybody makes their own determinations. So until next time, walk with rhythm, and the sandworms are back. What does that mean? Who knows? But as Daniel and Marty watch from afar, you can watch me from afar as I discuss the either successful or train wreck, depending on how I feel, conclusion to the franchise. Until then, stay safe and have an amazing rest of your day, night, evening, afternoon, whatever it is for you. See you.